Greetings ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to today's Reddit series video from the subreddit HFY called Human Rights Chapter 7, written by Puzzle-Headed Charge 4. The enemy has begun to employ a new and most cruel bomb. Emperor Hirohito said that in a radio address informing his people that their government had surrendered. The 100 million would not be required in the end of their own lives, like shattered jewels, to preserve the dream of the imperial honor. I kept telling myself that this Alaska would place a similar value on sentient life. It was a hopeful sign. Why would two members of the High Command visit a prisoner of war camp shortly before a pitched battle? 2 reasons. They expected to lose, or they expected to win. The Commandant had said that the Zalask needed the end of the war as quickly and decisively as possible, and I agreed with his analysis. They could not afford a major defeat, or to initiate talks after suffering one. To them and the galaxy, it would be a surrender in all but name. So, if they were expecting to lose, they needed to open negotiations before the X-13 division got wherever it was going. That was one possible explanation. The other was that they anticipated a crushing victory, and in the triumphal afterglow would condescend to treat with the humans, appearing to the galaxy as a gracious elder species, granting its inferior clemency. I had no idea what terms they would offer, but it seems likely that they would include restrictions to which the UN could not agree. The war would continue, and my species would either be annihilated, or, for the first time in all the centuries of trying, prosecute a successful genocide. So, if that battle was fought, we both would lose. The only way our species survived was to make our exit as equals, and if they were coming here, that meant that they were at least willing to consider doing so. What was frustrating me most was that I had no idea what conditions the Zalask were likely to demand. I knew what the UN would insist on: freedom of communication, commerce, and navigation, the right to keep our military as large and as mobile as we saw fit, though there were a few weapon systems that might be unwilling to decommission if pressed. We would refuse to share blame, though it was possible that we might not demand the Zalask publicly accept it. I didn't know what we could possibly do to make them not feel threatened by us. One thing at a time. Right, first we had to convince our visitor. And, well, I'm not the most personable of all possible people. I'd been racking my brains for 2 days now, and I still had no idea what I could possibly say. What words did you use to convince an entire species? I rolled over onto my stomach, burrowing deeper into my blankets. I'd sleep on it. That's what I'd do. It was the only good thing about being a prisoner of war. You could nap whenever you wanted. The door slammed open and Z came rocketing in it. "Skipper, the dude's here," she yelled, much more agitated than I'd seen her in some actions. "Very well," I replied, sitting up and struggling out of my blankets. I hopped down and set about straightening myself up while Z positively danced with excitement on the spot. I just passed my own inspection when an equally disconcerted guard joined her in the doorway and shrieked its summons at the top of its lungs. "So nothing important going on today, then?" I strolled to the Commandant's office while the guards alternated between affecting ice composure and hopping from foot to foot in a highly entertaining attempt to make me move faster. About halfway there, he finally broke down and spoke to me. "Commander, please walk quicker." He looked at me desperate as I obliged, even though he'd knocked me down a rank. He'd said please. Progress? The Commandant's office was crowded with 5 Zalask jammed into it, 2 older, which was interesting. I'd never seen a Zalask above military age, and 2 young adults in addition to the Commandant, 3 males and 1 female, who had a rare electric blue scales. The others were all the usual dusky red-orange. The Commandant and standing wedged in the corner, looking as imperturbable as ever. I saluted him and introduced myself. Captain Charlotte Sorensen, ranking officer of the prisoners of war. He and one of the other Zalask, I guess, was drawn to acknowledge me, while the other 3 gazed stoically out the window. Productive attitude to have going on. They weren't the people I was here to convince. The person I was here was short of the Zalask, about 7.5 feet tall, and powerfully built, like he'd been a wrestler when he was younger. He was staring at me, appraisingly, or at least with no obvious judgment, yet. That's a good sign. An awkward pause, during which no one spoke. Then, "What do you think of the accommodation, Captain?" Trond barked. "The Zalask used the cold-blooded a few million years ago, and they still weren't terribly efficient at being endotherms, so their idea of a blanket was almost as thick as a comforter. And to someone from the southern US of A, who'd been mocked all her life for having zero resistance to the cold, it was extremely welcomed. However, they still hadn't given us any dabbed meat, and it was my right and prerogative to witch about it to the high heavens. Our living quarters are satisfactory, even generous to UN standards," I replied carefully. "We especially appreciate the blankets. However, I must complain about the food." His eyes, a little dim from the cataracts, narrowed slightly. "Yes, the perennial demand for meat. In our culture, once living flesh is reserved for warriors. Synth protein with which you are provided is adequate for your species' nutritional needs. It's a privation that you will simply have to accustom yourselves to." I smiled, showing off my teeth. So unimpressive on Earth, everyone but the Commandant flinched. "Sir, I understand the cultural differences between our people, and of course I am willing to tolerate many of them, but not when it comes to the detrimental effect on the health of my men. Synth protein is not sufficient." I continued smiling. Trond's eyes became brilliant electric blue slits, and the Commandant's wide in alarm. "He's gonna bite out my throat." Instead, he threw back his head and burst out laughing. "Ah, yes, I see I was told rightly about you," he chortled. "Ha, this guy chortles. I just knew that I was going to get a shot in by the end of this." "So," Trond loomed over me, "you complain of the food. What else?" "Watch your freaking mouth, Sorensen." "I have no other complaints," I said, squashing my childishness. "The Commandant has been very conscientious in the application of the Geneva Convention. We have been treated well." His eyes brightened up again. "Oh, no further complaints. I must say I'm pleasantly surprised. I was warned your tribe, the Americans, could be rather querulous. As a proverb says, they who fight with weapons will never fight with words." He laughed again. "Okay, he definitely has a point. We can be," I said, as diplomatic as I knew how. "However, no nation reaches space without learning to compromise, even, or perhaps especially, with its enemies." Trond stared hard at me, flicking his forked, dark purple tongue meditatively. "Are they supposed to be that color? Maybe it's because he's older. Do you expect me to believe that species that admits it nearly destroyed itself 3 times, and Zala knows how many others it keeps secret, is capable of directing and sustaining such tolerance to aliens?" Trond bit off the last word, clearly loath to apply it to his people. I was on the verge of thinking up a reply when the other official, Poor, spoke up for the first time. "Of course it does," he said smoothly. "It expects us to be easily fooled by its dishonorable human deceptions." His eyes were pale, clear black, like smoky quartz. They smoldered with a hatred I'd only seen on human faces. And even as my temper rose at being referred to as an it, something somewhere in me was saddened to learn that such an ability was not confined to humanity. "I must object to your use of that word," the Commandant said lowly, his tone perfectly neutral. "It is recognized to prefer non-sentience when whatever else the humans may be, they are indisputably sentient." Poor snorted, but the first time I had ever heard Zalask make such a noise. "Yes, the human lover speaks up for them. Just as I suspected, you really have been taken in, haven't you?" "Overspeaker," Trond barked, cutting him off. "Such language is inappropriate. Restrain your tongue. You embarrass the code." He turned to me, eyes glinting. "I apologize for my colleague. He has been under stress." "That's quite all right. I understand completely," I said, doing my best to sound genuine and sympathetic. I must have succeeded because Trond was visibly surprised, as though he had expected me to bite once insulted. "Common ground. You each expect each other to take a chomp. What does that say about a pair of us?" Poor seethed, but Trond's rebuke was strong enough to shut him up, at least temporarily. It struck me that it was probably nothing short of humiliating for them to hear, treating what they regarded as little more than a rabid animal as a social equal. I felt a flash of admiration for Trond. It may seem like a very small thing to snap at a colleague for his language, so does giving one word order: fire. These guys made the first move by coming here, and I have to do something to meet them halfway. Unfortunately, I had no idea what. What worked the first time? "I do not believe I have yet expressed my thanks for your military being so quick to adopt provisions of the Geneva Convention," I blurted out. 5 pairs of jewel bright eyes swiveled to stare at me. My government was pleasantly surprised that our species shared such common values. That wasn't too aggressive, was it? Wasn't too groveling? Somehow it's both. I about fretted myself in pieces and span for 3 seconds. Tron stood up a little straighter. Of course, he rumbled. My species have never had the, problems of yours, but we are always glad to see a race striving to draw closer to the code. As the proverb says, there is virtue in the struggle. That is the most human thing I've ever heard a Zelask say. Well, not counting the Commandant's philosophy lectures, but he was weird. I am glad you think so. I did my best to sound diplomatic. For much of human history, that has been one of our guiding principles. We knew our society was imperfect, but never believed it was doomed to stay that way. Tron gave me a searching look. Poor appeared to struggle internally and then burst out, but you have not fixed it. Note the you. I raised my eyebrows at him. Do you mean to imply that your society is infallible? Then why are you losing to us? His tail lashed out for a moment as his eyes grew steadily brighter. You do not follow the code. We follow a code. I cut him off this time, and the end of my rope with the lack of code being used as a justification to attack against my species. If your people had studied our culture more carefully, you would have realized this. Certainly, our code is not followed universally, but neither is yours. It was not embraced so wholeheartedly and so rapidly as yours, but it is not followed with the same zeal with which you adhere to yours. But humans do have laws. I was surprised by how angry I was. Most of humanity, myself included, never thought about laws unless they were complaining about them, or if they were bold, attempting to circumvent them. The benefits of the created were taken for granted. When was the last time you heard someone say, "Boy, I'm sure grateful murder is illegal"? But even we understood that the price of civilization was self-control. Even we understood that was what separated us from the animals. And the insistence that humanity follow a code to be worthy of independent existence was fanaticism, nothing more. My species had had far too much experience with the consequences of fanaticism for me to accept it. That is what I wish to discuss with you. Tron pulled back into the conversation, while the outraged Puer opened and shut his mouth like a particularly ugly, idiocratically challenged fish. I will be blunt. I'm not a diplomat, and neither are you. For all of your proficiency with language, I know your record. My assessors assured me that the contrarian blood-soaked mammals from the edge of the galaxy were a fluke of evolution, that you lacked even the ability to be civilized. I've seen firsthand that the assessment is inaccurate. Therefore, our casus belli no longer exists. That is, it need no longer exist. If your creatures can honor not only maturity enforceable agreements like your Geneva Convention, but peace treaties. For a species so warlike, surely bitter medicine to swallow, Pure put in rudely. Don't frick with this up, whatever you do, don't frick this up. I looked at Tron in the flimsy eyes, glowing like sapphires cloaked in spiderwebs. This had to be too much to hope for. Peace is what we desire, above all else, I said clearly. But to the United Nations, to humanity, peace does not mean simply a cessation of hostilities. For us, peace means that our rights are secured. Tron hissed in confusion. Poor is his outrage. What rights? They barked simultaneously, one interrogatively, the other rhetorically. To my surprise, the Commandant spoke first. They're human rights, he answered, with much more force than you would expect equivalent of a colonel to use when addressing a member of the High Command. He eyed both of them, who were staring at him in near shock, with a trace of impatience. For him, the equivalent of shouting. The humans define themselves by their rights. They are not the Canary, preaching for the philosophy, or the Drizagan, engaged in their commerce, or the Ailia, creating their art. They are human, so they must have their rights, and they must have their rights to be human, the same rights that they would have extended to us if we had not been so hasty. I'm gonna get shot. Not helpful, Brain. Exactly, Boer seized the Commandant's last statement. They would have, whatever you may be deluded into thinking the humans are. We cannot deny that they have tasted our blood, and they shall always thirst for it. They are our enemies, now and forever. There was a religious fervor about his words, a panic in his eyes. Tron glared at him, but was looking unsure of himself. The humans cannot possibly be so ruthless as to you fear. But he sounded more like he was trying to mollify me, the genuinely convinced of humanity's capacity for mercy. There's a quality you haven't yet discussed. Sir, I broke in again, gaining everyone's attention. You said earlier that there's a virtue in struggle. If I may inquire, what does the code have to say about mistakes made in the course of that struggle? Tron answered that one. Such errors are to be learned from, since they were committed with proper intention. They do not need to be purged, but rather held as examples of importance of closely studying the code, and how they are truly civilized beings inclined naturally to the code. Okay, I can work with that. I took a breath. Humanity has been making such mistakes for a millennia. You said it yourself, your species never had to face many of the problems that plagued mine. This is both a blessing and a curse. You were spared the calamities into which my species hurled itself, but you remain ignorant of the lessons we learned from them, the lessons that we have perhaps struggled with most, thick-skulled and stiff-necked as we are, is that of mercy. I almost cringed when I said that word. It's one of those things that seem so soft and maudlin it shouldn't be in the same sentence as real, hard things like war. It was almost ridiculous. But at one time, so was the idea of humans might fly, might cure disease, and might be capable of governing themselves. I, and humanity, owed a great deal to those who had not cared about such ridicule. Now it was my chance to repay some of that debt. I'm advocating for humanity, and the belief that I'd come back to again and again was that we strove to rise above our natures. Mercy was the first conceived of as having come from the gods. In some religions, it was his defining characteristic. So there could be no better way for us to prove the essence of our humanity than by showing mercy. Concluding an armistice with the Zelask would not be pleasant. I might not be even possible. But as was becoming clearer to me, it was our duty to try. Our duty to our dead, to our living, and to the billions of ancestors who advanced the battle and commanded observed rage in every human. I claimed that we deserved rights, but I had not spoken on the responsibilities that came with them. For us to remain worthy of our human rights, we had to uphold the human responsibility to preserve life. So long as the Zelask did not declare their intention to continue to attack us down to the last man, woman, and child, it was our human responsibility to coexist with them. Humanity had always been drawn to playing God. Perhaps now we were capable of doing so. 10 eyes regarded me as blank as they were bright. Of course they're confused. This is another thing of which they have no need. To be human has requirements other than genetics. I could not name them all, but one of the most difficult to show is mercy. I see you do not understand what I mean. After all, there is barely even a word for it in your language. Mercy is a grace towards those who do not deserve it. My voice turned hard. You attacked my species without provocation. You contemplated our extermination in cold blood. You deemed us less than sentient. State it plainly. These are crimes. I took a breath to control myself. I couldn't frick this up. It was as simple as that. The important things are always simple. The simple things are always hard. However, the crimes of the few do not justify the punishment of the many. You are correct. There is no longer a cause for this war. Or at least there does not need to be. My people will show yours mercy if you wish to conclude an armistice. I kept my expression neutral, as if I was cajoling a reluctant superior. The commandant was doing something weird with his face. I'd never seen a Zelask part their jaws to show their stubby teeth like that before. Then it struck me that he was smiling. Poor sneered, a weird, wild light coming to his eyes. "And why," he hissed, fighting amongst the contempt dripping from his voice, "do you humans show us something we do not deserve?" I figured the Zelask, with their observation and structure of propriety, would have trouble with being given something without perceiving themselves as having earned it. Fortunately, I had a justification. Because to do this otherwise would strip us of our humanity, I said. As sentience, you deserve mercy. As sentience, we must show you mercy. So you do us a great favor by accepting our offer as we do by extending it. Poor had gone stock still. He was a politician, and he recognized that I'd out-offered him. The Tron looked slightly overwhelmed. The code classified the world into either right or wrong, and it left the Zalask singularly unprepared for the human practice of doing both at once. The Commandant, however, looked, satisfied? I'm gonna kick the smug bastard, just let off some steam. However, it is the greatest of stakes which we contemplate, Trond now apparently the one having doubts. To enter into an agreement with you exposes dear homeworld Zelaya to dishonor, should your government not be quite as, unified as you have assured it, Miss. We have seen the vast reach of your colonies and the sweeping range of your merchant and naval fleets. We know that many of your species never set foot on Earth in their lifetimes. He flicked his tail, like a displeased cat. You humans do not value your home, and no being with any respect for the code should fail to respect its cradle. It's suspicious, the rootlessness, and it makes us wonder how many other traditions you'll scorn or abandon once you see no further need for them. Al? That's a new one. I scrambled through explanations humans brought home with them. Humans assimilated their new domains into existing structures. How? 2 territories were applying for the statehood before the war intervened. I couldn't think of anything to say to convince them that we paid our homeworld a homage and believed it due, because we didn't. Humanity had an instinctive tendency to look backward, to obsess over the past, but in a somewhat paradoxical twist, history taught us that doing so led to nothing but bloodshed, and finally humanity had dragged its eyes around. We simply didn't view our homeworld the way the Zalask did. The silence stretched out, and outside someone started singing. We all turned to look at the window. It was a nice sunny day, and several prisoners could be seen walking, lounging, and playing catch, but the singer was out of view. I didn't recognize the voice, but I could hear every word of the song. It was bittersweet, poignant, lyrics so simple, describing the singer's home, the melody as mournful as it was beautiful. It was a song of someone who'd never expected to see their home again, who comforted themselves with the grief by remembering how good it had been with them while they had it, and by hoping that they were sacrificed and it would remain that way for others into the future. The singer's voice shivered with pain, climbed with hope. It was at once completely resigned and completely defiant. Without poisoning the game, Sarah and Kimmel started singing along. Sarah Lee's voice strong and smooth, Kimmel's thin and rough. Other prisoners started appearing in doorways or at windows attracted by the sounds. Those who knew the words joined in. Those who didn't grinned along. Smiles, at once sad and sharp. They couldn't have been eavesdropping, could they? Our music may be an expression of our humanity's most easily understood, even if the words are not. Until now, I hadn't known Zalask were capable of shedding tears. The song ended, and Tron turned to me in the laser-like intensity of his old eyes. So, this is what you are. His voice was deep and final. He was making a judgment. You are a species that seeks peace because it has waged so much war, that loves its home so much that it is willing to leave it, that knows mercy, and above all else, you value your rights. This, then, is humanity. Yes, I answered, but only some of it. He stared at open his mouth, confused, and then I saw the flash of comprehension and suddenly flipped his tail. The Zalask grinned. Very well, you creatures, overspeak are pure. Pure just about jumped out of the scales. The humans require our assistance to maintain their honor, and it would be dishonorable for us not to render it. Come, we must contact the United Nations and communicate our willingness to negotiate an armistice. Pure's lustrous black eyes were bugging, but he was too much a weasel not to slide into such a well-offered hole. Of course, he replied, smoothly as though he hadn't been a idiot against it. He collected up his aides and they swept out. Trond made to follow them, before turning back to me. I don't know what it is about you, he said. I came here knowing that the negotiations with humans were impossible. I have seen only one camp, and now somehow I am convinced of your entire species' ability to broker and uphold peace. Why is that? His eyes narrowed suddenly. What's special about you? Nothing whatsoever, I answered honestly. We're ordinary humans. Trond shuddered. You have no idea how astonishing that is. He put his head over his one side. You humans do not seem to realize how special you are. His eyes brightened back up again. Perhaps then you'll forgive that we did not immediately realize it either. End of chapter. And that, my friends, concludes this video. I hope that you enjoyed. If you did, please consider supporting the author from the link down below. Otherwise, if you wish to support this channel, there are numerous ways to do so, like liking, subscribing, and possibly even becoming a patron. Otherwise, the easiest way would be to share. And until the next video, I hope that you all have a good one, and I'll see you then. Cheers.